Calling all girlies who want to talk about Clayface. Let's do this! For our purposes, I will be primarily referring to the Silver Age villain Clayface, alternatively known as Matt Hagen. There's a few other iterations of him in existence, including the Grant Morrison, Arkham Asylum, Strange House on Strange Earth version, which I don't have a ton of experience with, but is high on my list of stuff to read next. I will be mentioning that, but not necessarily focusing on it. So Clayface, Matt Hagen, shows up in the first season of Batman the Animated Series. And like so many other villains in Batman the Animated Series, you meet him basically in the process of his origin story. There's a couple things at play here, perhaps most notably a kind of obvious addiction allegory. Matt Hagen's face was disfigured in an accident. You get a little bit of an overview about that, and he's become very dependent on this extremely expensive and hard to access experimental face cream called Renew You. The company's owned by a corrupt pharma CEO because that's kind of how this thing works. The cream works by turning his face into a clay-like substance that he can then kind of move around and shape. It's marketed as an anti-aging cream, basically. Very unknown side effects. Eventually, the CEO starts refusing to provide the cream unless Hagen basically forms his face into Bruce Wayne's face and commits crimes pretending to be Bruce Wayne. As far as Hagen sees it, that's the choice, right? Like, it's continue his career or give everything up for ethics, essentially. He chooses to keep his career. The initial transformation from Mark Hagen into Clayface is traumatic, to say the least. Not really new or unique for the origin story of a villain to be traumatic in this universe. But basically, the requests of the pharma CEO become too much. Hagen breaks into the headquarters, gets caught trying to steal some amount of this cream that he's become dependent on. And in one of those moments that's really disturbing in a way that's kind of jarring to you as an adult looking back at this as a kid, even if maybe it didn't occur to you as a kid. A similar comparison that comes to mind is actually in Who Framed Roger Rabbit when the Toon shoe or whatever gets like thrown into the turpentine or whatever that is. Like animated for kids, very disturbing Don Bluth stuff. But basically two of the CEO's goons pour a tub of this cream down his throat while holding him down. Which brings us to Clayface. So you can see the name of this Medium article I'm going to talk about in a second, so you can get excited. Clayface and the manifestation of AIDS crisis fears in Batman. Woohoo! He becomes this kind of amorphous blob of a dude who, it turns out, can shapeshift. A much more extreme version of what Mark Hagen was already doing, as is often the case for these villains. This is the one thing I want to make sure I really focus on. Particularly in the Grant Morrison version of Clayface, there's a lot of very queer-coded sentiment or statement or analysis or characterization. And when watching that first season of Batman the Animated Series, I was actually really pleasantly surprised and pleased to see what seems like quite obvious queer coding in the way they present Clayface in this origin story. I think it's a two-parter. Let me refer back to that Medium article for what feels like the best point. Shortly after Mark Hagen, Clayface, post-transition into Clayface, realizes that he can shapeshift, it just takes a lot of effort. He has a little bit of a meltdown. And his business partner / stunt double, Teddy, who is also his roommate or domestic partner, and all the scenes you see them in together besides, I think, one, are all domestic, like in their shared living space. Teddy is much more convinced than Mark that Mark can find a way through this, that he can work the circumstances that he's in and find a way out that works for him. And as a yoga and meditation teacher by trade, this is the bit that stood out to me most when I watched the episode, so referring back to that Medium article now. I can't remember the name of the author of this piece off the top of my head, but I showed the name of it earlier. It's on Medium. Teddy, Matt's stunt double and only discernible friend, was someone Matt trusted enough to tell both of his initial accident and his later condition and deterioration. Throughout both parts of Feet of Clay, the episode, Teddy tries and fails to reach out to Matt, offering only support, encouragement, and love, where Matt sees only the end of his life, falling into a fatal spiral of revenge. This dialogue was the part I found really compelling. When Teddy sees that Mark is able to shapeshift, he's filled with hope. He says, "You can go on, we can go on." Clayface says, "Don't you see it's too hard? It's like tensing a muscle. I can't keep it up for long. My career, my life. It is gone." He then, I think very symbolically, literally throws Teddy, his partner, against the wall and leaves him unconscious as he goes to wreak havoc. There's so many moments of decision like that, like the kind of crossroads and then choosing a pathway in this Batman universe. With villains, yes, but with Batman and Gordon and Harvey Dent as well. And a word about Grant Morrison, just as far as I've seen it. There's a version you can get of his Arkham Asylum Strange House on Strange Earth that has really extensive kind of script notes that and like kind of additional commentary that he's provided. He gets very, very explicit about the connection he sees between Clayface and the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and also uses that to explore the weirdness of Batman Bruce Wayne's relationship or lack of relationship with intimacy and sexuality. I would actually love to hear examples countering this. It doesn't seem like he has a lot of successful relationships that get out of the kind of like wistful yearning or fantasy or like cat and mouse. Like, I know you're you, but do I know you're you thing with, for example, Chase Meridian and Selena Kyle. Grant Morrison goes so far as to say that he's kind of the embodiment of like compulsive heteronormativity because he's not asexual. I would actually argue that there are certain instances where it kind of seems like he might be closeted, but I don't actually think he's like in touch enough with himself and his own personality and what he wants for that to even be something that people say. Although it is funny because like the Phyllis Schlaflys of the world have always been very, very weirded out by the whole Batman Robin potential homoeroticism thing. The whole thing can get like very kinky very quickly, just in terms of like the bondage stuff is right there, not necessarily with Batman and Robin, but it's there if you squint, you know. Certainly in other places. But I don't see a lot of people diving into like the continued weirdness of Bruce Wayne and of Batman and like the lack of actual kind of like sexual or intimate relationship there in any meaningful way. So at least in Grant Morrison's take on Arkham Asylum, Joker is kind of queer chaos. I'm pretty sure he also describes Batman as like the human manifestation of just like two clenched ass cheeks. I hope that doesn't get this video penalized or whatever. But like compulsive heteronormativity without connection, without intimacy, without obvious connection to sexuality or self. And the childishness of it all, like we've talked about before with Bruce Wayne. And then Clayface is more than this, but particularly in Morrison's take on Arkham Asylum, he serves as a sort of vehicle for us to understand Batman's sort of like core revulsion with stuff like illness and what he sees as vice. Which seems rich coming from a guy who is purposefully not connected to any society or societal institutions or real people at all in his day-to-day life, but who canonically and in several places insists that he does fundamentally believe in rehabilitation. I guess I'll end on the note that my Batman girly nerds who are also into stuff like social justice and social work, restorative justice, finding a better way to approach the justice system, check out the comics, particularly if you're someone who's been into like anime or manga or something like that. They're super readable, really interesting. And every writer kind of has a fundamental different approach to that question of rehabilitation. Whether it's possible, whether it's something that should be prioritized, who should be prioritizing it, what ways can that kind of high-minded effort be corrupted, with honestly a lot more sensitivity than I see in other types of literature. Anyway, this video went long. I've been looking forward to making it for a while, so please weigh in. Bye.